The U.S. continues to send to China an array of semiconductors, aerospace components, artificial intelligence technology, and other items that could be used to advance Beijing's military interests. Now you're probably thinking what I first thought. Doesn't the U.S. have all kinds of export restrictions on selling sensitive technology to China, especially things with military potential? And isn't the Commerce Department always adding Chinese companies to the Entity List, a list of foreign companies and people the U.S. puts trade restrictions on? The answer is yes, but no. On paper, yes, the U.S. has all kinds of restrictions on trade with China. For instance, in 2018, Congress passed the Export Control Reform Act. It put a bunch of restrictions on emerging and foundational technologies, things like AI and quantum computing. China is known for IP theft, so we really don't want to be selling them that technology. There's the Entity List, which lists specific Chinese companies that U.S. companies can't sell things to, either because they do things like use slave labor or they're connected to China's military. Now, I always thought the whole idea of the Entity List was stupid, because the Chinese Communist Party has what it calls military-civil fusion. According to the U.S. State Department, this eliminates barriers between China's civilian research and commercial sectors and its military and defense industrial sectors. In other words, there's no distinction in selling sensitive technology to private Chinese companies versus the Chinese Communist Party's military. The military can just take any piece of sensitive technology sold to any private Chinese company. But it turns out the Entity List is stupid for more reasons than I thought. Get this. According to a Washington, D.C.-based research and data analytics firm, there are tens of thousands of Chinese entities that may meet the U.S. criteria for military end-user export restrictions. In other words, they should probably be on the Entity List. Out of those tens of thousands, guess how many are currently on the Commerce Department's Entity List? I'll give you a moment. It's 70. That's right, 70 out of potentially tens of thousands. And it gets worse. Just because one of these companies is on the Entity List, that doesn't mean U.S. companies can't sell to them. They just need to get a license. And the Commerce Department usually grants it. The entirety of U.S. exports to China in 2020, Commerce officials required a license for less than 0.5%. Of that fraction, the agency approved 94% of applications for technology exports to China. That's how, in less than a year, the Commerce Department granted $100 billion worth of export licenses to U.S. companies that supplied telecom giant Huawei and China's largest chip maker, SMIC. Those are military-linked Chinese companies. That's why they're on the Entity List, which apparently means nothing. It's profit over self-preservation. This is like a lamb selling a wolf a knife, a fork, and a George Foreman grill. But hey, at least those companies had to get licenses from the Commerce Department. Why even go through that hassle? Because in some cases, U.S. companies are able to sell technology to Chinese customers on the Entity List without even applying for licenses. For example, all a U.S. company needs to do is make a product overseas, and then it can freely sell it to a Chinese company, even if it's on the Entity List. Those are the Commerce Department's own rules. And some sensitive tech isn't even restricted, like semiconductor equipment manufacturing tools. Those can be used to make semiconductors, which can then be used for everything from missiles to stealth jets. Sales to China of those manufacturing tools have more than doubled since 2017. Yes, even after a trade war and COVID. But hey, as long as their check's clear, I'm sure we can trust them. More after the break.